Hey besties, if you see this, it's a sign that we're going to discuss the normative architecture of reality towards an object-oriented ethics. I am Precious Olavere together with my partner Audrey Romena.
This slide provides an introduction to the presentation titled The Normative Architecture of Reality Towards an Object-Oriented Ethics, which is based on the research conducted by Harman et al. In 2016. It functions as a guide for the next conversation. The offered background material emphasizes the difficulties associated with standard meta-ethical concepts, including the division between facts and values and the criticism of separation between subject and object. The thesis proposes that ethical rules originate from the intrinsic normativity found inside things, hence rejecting the notion of human exceptionalism. This suggests a change in viewpoint towards seeing ethical standards as features that arise naturally from the world, rather than being imposed by human beings. The key topics discussed are critiques of subject-oriented ethical theories, a deflationary view of agency, and apprehensions about favoring particular human interests at the expense of larger ethical considerations. Nature of posthumanism. Posthumanism is examined as a critical reassessment in the nature of humanity, making a comparison to how postmodernism relates to modernism. The Night of Fate, a notion taken from Kierkegaard, is given to exemplify the contradictory essence of posthumanism. Posthumanism encompasses both significant existential shifts and everyday experiences, emphasizing the intricate and profound nature of this philosophical viewpoint. By presenting posthumanism in this way, this slide prepares for a more thorough examination of how human experience is changing in the framework of posthumanist theory. This examines the function of philosophy in investigating truth and normativity. It highlights the role of philosophy as a tool for investigation and examination. Apart from the concept of truth, the connection between truth and normativity is explored, with normative concerns being approached as meta-ethical investigations into the basis of ethical obligations. The slide establishes foundations for a more thorough examination of philosophical viewpoints on ethics and morality by placing philosophy in the context of the search for truth and normativity. This presentation presents a realist approach that challenges theological absolutism and proposes that ethical rules arise from the tangible entity. Horizontal normativity is a notion that challenges the idea of unliteral normativity by suggesting that ethical rules are spread out throughout different entities and interactions. This viewpoint highlights the interrelatedness and intricacy of ethical discussions, dismissing oversimplified ideas of moral absolutism or relativism. This slide actually prepares for a detailed conversation about ethical standards and their underpinnings by exploring the concept of object absolutism and subject relativism. So here, dinidiscuss naman yung difficulties involved in preserving a space for critical inquiry in the field of ethics education. It offers a criticism of certain ethical frameworks like Kantianism and utilitarianism due to its deterministic characteristics, which limit ethics to inflexible rules or computations. The repudiation of normativity stemming from pure reasoning undermines the notion that ethical standards may be exclusively deduced from rationality alone. This slide sets the setting for a debate on the richness and diversity of ethical viewpoints by emphasizing the challenge of preserving free inquiry in ethics education and criticizing deterministic ethical frameworks. So, object-oriented ethics is paradigm that challenges idealized domains and rigid realisms. It aims to restore the ethical aspect by recognizing the agency and dignity of all creatures. The historic roots of speculative realism provide the backdrop for the emergence of object oriented ethics within wider philosophical trends. This slide offers an analysis of the historical origins of object oriented ethics, shedding light on the philosophical underpinnings of this ethical paradigm. So, this one naman presents the notion of correlationism, which suggests that human understanding of reality is limited to the relationship between thinking and existence. The discourse criticizes post-Kantian philosophy for continuing the belief in subjectivism, which regards the subject as a simply transparent medium through which reality is seen. The presentation actually emphasizes the constraints of post-Kantian philosophy in effectively tackling urgent matters such as ecological challenges and technological breakthroughs. The presentation actually introduced the notion of correlationism and offers a critique of post-Kantian philosophy, which prefers a more in-depth examination speculative philosophy. Next, so here it examines the recent resurgence of speculative philosophy as a method to surpass limitation imposed by personal perspectives and embrace new realms of comprehension. This statement underscores the need of rejecting rigid and inflexible methods of comprehending reality and instead embracing more expansive concepts of reality that go beyond individual perspectives. This slide highlights the significance of re-exploring speculative philosophy as a means of tackling current difficulties and exploring fresh avenues for philosophical investigation. Naman, it focuses on the objections of absolutism and relativism in philosophy. This discourse presents Miyasu concept of a non-absolutist absolute, which questions established beliefs and encourages philosophers to investigate the potential for obtaining ultimate truth or reality without relying on human subjectivity. This slide actually emphasizes the need of having a sophisticated comprehension that balances between absolutism and relativism, which prepares the ground for a more thorough examination of Miyasu's concept and its consequences. Rejection of reductionism and flat ontology. So this presentation explores the refusal of reductionism and hierarchical viewpoints in ontology. It promotes a flat ontology and irreductional, pushing for an egalitarian view of reality that recognizes the inherent agency and significance of all beings. This slide criticizes reductionist techniques for oversimplifying complicated phenomena and promotes embracing the complexity and liveliness of reality. By rejecting reductionism and adopting a flat ontology, this slide prepares for a more thorough examination of the intricacies and variety of existence. So the last slide that I will discuss presents Harman Object-Oriented Philosophy, or OOP, which focuses on the indivisibility and inherent qualities of things. The text presents the four components of object, which is tangible object, tangible attributes, perceptible objects, and perceptible attributes. So this slide examines the impact of Husserlian ideas on Harman's framework, specifically focusing on the notion of eidetic reduction. This process helps to uncover the fundamental alternable characteristics of events. The presentation introduces Harman's OOP as a means to delve into object-oriented ethics and its philosophical foundations. Next slide will be discussed by Precious.
Now, let us first discuss some of the important terms. Real object in this story is that unified, autonomous, all of which the so-called real properties are essential delimitative. To make things short, real objects is yun yung mga bagay na physical. While on the other hand, let's go to sensual object. These are the things that may or may not be a visible object. It's like a manifestation of the object. Real properties naman is essentially constitutive of the object but are concealed behind superficial appearances. In Harman's evocative language, real object is defined as a dark crystal veiled in a private vacuum, irreducible to its own pieces and equally irreducible to its outward relation with other things. So kung meron na sensual object kanina, meron din siyang sensual properties. Ano ba ang sensual properties? This is the properties that we can enumerate or theoretically abstract. Essence naman, ang definition niya is nothing more than the tension between a real object and its real properties in a single distance. Kumbaga sa system ni Harman, parang sinasabi niya na we'll look at things uniquely and things have distinct properties to each other. Now, let's move forward to the ontological withdrawal, which is therefore at the center. Let's move forward to the ontological withdrawal, which is therefore at the center of Harman's object-oriented position, and he argues for it in several different ways throughout his body of work. All of which, however, come out of his rather novel reading of Heidegger's analysis of tools and broken tools in Being and Time. So let us first define equipment or tools. These are encountered most primarily as ready to hand. Okay. So ano nga ba yung being and time na sinasabi ni Heidegger? So ganito lang yung concept niya. Such entities are not objects for knowing the world theoretically. They are simply what gets used, what gets produced, and so forth. So basically, para sa kanya, yung tools for human use or consumption lang. Kumbaga sa next phrase, which is the hammer makes sense only if we understand the concept of nails, boards, houses, which only makes sense if we understand that for the sake of which we are engaged. This one is an example of hermeneutic circle. That means, mas magkakaroon ka ng knowledge doon sa isang bagay na yon within the referential of the other things. Like, sa hammer nga, mas maiintindihan mo yung gamit ng hammer if naiintindihan mo kung ano yung gamit ng or yung concept ng nails, boards, and houses. In Heideggerian terms, it is true that phenomena of consciousness fail to do justice to the full depths of things, to their inscrutable being withdrawn from all presence. Yet, it is also the case that the practical handling of entities fails to do them justice as well. So Arnold Wolfendale stated that whole set excess is essential because therein is essential feature of entities that is excessive. This move, he goes on, converts the essential excess into an excessive essence. Far from challenging the retreat of philosophers from the world into the bastion of consciousness, he has simply extended the domain of consciousness into the world, which is criticized by Erasmus Ogilt afterwards, that the setting of a limit, the drawing of a line, thus in itself entail and postulate knowledge about what is to be found on both sides of the line. In other words, there is a hidden contradiction in the Kantian setting of final limits within the realm of knowledge. Because setting a limit between what we can know and what we cannot know necessarily entails some form of knowledge about what is at both sides of that limit. We, human beings, is always in the state of knowing and not knowing. So let us now proceed to the other conflicts or issues on Harman's theory. The first one is the theory of vicarious causation. It simply means real objects never interact. Their central counterparts are, at bottom, nothing but the products of interactions. Next is the Gaurilia metaphysics. These entities in turn are made up of still further perceptions. Next is the nominal reality, that every relational effect occurs only indirectly. In the end, Harman's conclusion is disappointing, since it is not enough to point out that such interactions occur, but at the phenomenological level of sensual things and their features. Because in other words, which at last fulfills Husserl's promise of returning to the things themselves, Harman, no less than Husserl, fails in this regard. Let us now proceed to the influences on Justin Harman's perspective on objects. We have here Heidegger that stated all entities purely as resources for human consumption. Next is Miyasu, wants to be able to think being prior to or dependent of its givenness. Next is Descartes. Being as such is not some pristine but inert, value-neutral res extensa over which we, as essentially valuative beings. Lastly is Harman, which defined that objects are real, infallible, vacuum-sealed numeral core that withdraws from every relation. Now is the chapter 2. Harman weaves a historical tale centered on the development toward and the consequences following the so-called is-ought or fact-value distinction. David Hume was the first to formulate the distinction explicitly, which is called Hume's bullion. Hume relaxes the problematic substantialism of Descartes' metaphysical dualism, making space for Kant's transcendental idealism. We don't know the moral law. We are the moral law. For chapter 3, Harman creates a flat or egalitarian ontology. Being or being implies in essence being distinct. To be different implies resonating Bryan terms to make a difference. Inter-object sphere, it is the place where things happen, that is, where the beings of beings does it work. Harman also claims that each of the major ethical framework, like utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics, and consequently the fundamental sense in which we humans have tended to conceptualize the ethical as such, operate as technologies precisely in this manner. They strive to artificially simplify for privileged groups of human subjects the task of hearing and responding to the demands of objects. Jean-Luc Nancy's proposed ontologization of the ethical, according to which being is being with, and is always a relation between irreducible singularities. Last is chapter 4. Objects in the inter-object sphere relate to each other interpretively. Interpretation means it indicates a state of being exposed to, but undetermined by, the demands presented by other objects. Luigi Pearson offers a theory of interpretation that takes its objects seriously. Harman emphasizes this chapter on the very real issues in the United States, such as structural racism and police brutality. According to him, there are two common ways in which we tend to respond to this issue. Number 1 is the identification in subjective feeling, and the number 2 is the view from nowhere of objective statistical analysis. In summary, for Harman, to be a subject is just precisely to be exposed to the demands of other objects. Parang sinasabi na there is an interaction between objects. However, there is this limitation na hindi ito yung totally na magle-label doon sa object na yon. Hindi yung interaction na ito yung magle-label doon sa object. Let's move forward to the major flaw in the essentialist. Ontic rather than ontological. It deals with beings cut off from their being with facts rather than truth. Facts and values are both different, inasmuch that values is derived from facts, but there is something that deeper than facts which is the truth. Truth is the inaccessible origin. Our ethical systems are shaped by various assumptions and various constellations of facts interpreted in light of these assumptions. This is the domain of the proto-ethical, the bottomless self-presentation of real demands that both pre-exist and exceed all human measures. That's all, besties, and thank you guys for listening.